My name is Brenda. Welcome to Horrifying History, where you will hear about the unexplained and supernatural events that have stained the pages of history. Los Angeles in the summer of 1985 was supposed to feel glamorous. Palm trees, neon lights, endless highways, and Hollywood dreams. But while people slept with their windows open in the California heat, someone was moving through the darkness. He climbed through unlocked windows and walked through unlocked doors. With him, he carried guns, knives, tire irons, and rage. So lock your doors, my spooky friends. Today, you will hear the story of a serial killer who created a panic that was nothing like the police had ever seen before. But before we get started, I want to give you all a heads up. Today, we will be talking about child abuse, animal abuse, sexual assault, graphic murders, extreme violence, and satanic symbolism. Listener discretion is advised. Richard Ramirez was known by many names. His family knew him as Richie. Los Angeles KNBC TV called him the walk-in killer. Many news outlets called him the Valley Intruder, but the name that stuck was the Night Stalker. For over a year, the city of Los Angeles descended into a panic unlike anything they have ever seen before. Gun sales exploded. People started to sleep with knives or baseball bats beside their beds. Neighborhood watch groups formed overnight. How could one man cause all this hysteria? To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning. Richard Ramirez was born Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. His parents, Mercedes and Julian, were Mexican immigrants who had 5 children together. Julian was a railway worker while Mercedes stayed home to care for him and his siblings. From the outside, Richard's childhood appeared to be ordinary, but inside the home, violence simmered constantly. Julian was a violent alcoholic who was prone to explosive anger and physical abuse. Richard and his siblings were regularly beaten, and some accounts claim Julian tied his children up and assaulted them during fits of rage. On the family's best day, their household was very chaotic. When Richard was about 2 years old, a dresser reportedly fell and hit him in the head, knocking him unconscious. Later in his childhood, he was struck in the head by a swing at school so hard that Richard had to get stitches. After this incident, he started to suffer from epileptic seizures. My spooky friends, many people who have experienced head trauma never become violent in any way. But researchers have long studied whether repeated brain injuries, especially involving the frontal lobe, can affect impulse control, empathy, and aggression. Most people who experience head trauma never become violent criminals, but research shows that traumatic brain injuries and neurological abnormalities are significantly higher among serial killers. Rather than directly causing a person to be violent, brain injuries often act as a catalyst when combined with genetic predispositions and severe environmental stressors like childhood abuse or neglect. In Richard's case, his head injuries became one piece of a much larger and darker picture. Psychiatrist Michael Stone characterized Richard as a made psychopath versus a born psychopath. He claims that Richard's schizoid personality disorder was why he was indifferent to the suffering of his victims, and also led to his untreatability. Dr. Stone stated that those 2 episodes causing acquired brain injuries were not the only ones that Richard had. He allegedly was knocked unconscious multiple times before the age of 6 and would later develop temporal lobe epilepsy, an aggressive personality, and hypersexuality. By the age of 10, Richard was already using drugs like marijuana. He quickly moved to LSD, cocaine, and any drugs he could get his hands on. He would spend his nights wandering through cemeteries and peeping into people's windows. He developed a fascination with death, violence, and fear well before he started to hang out with his older cousin, Miguel Valdez, when he was 12 years old. young Richard idolized Miguel. He took Richard under his wing, and the two spent a lot of time together. Miguel was a soldier in the U.S. Army and had returned from war mentally unstable. When he was in Vietnam, Miguel became a serial killer and a rapist. He would tell Richard about the war crimes he committed and showed Richard graphic Polaroid photos of women that he claimed he sexually assaulted and murdered. Some of the women in the photos were shown tied to trees or posts. Others were disembodied or decapitated. Miguel would tell Richard how he tortured the women, and Richard listened. Richard later stated that he was fascinated rather than repulsed by Miguel's images and stories. Miguel taught Richard some of his military skills that would help Richard commit his future crimes. He taught the boy stealth and killing techniques while he told hours of violent stories that filled the mind of an already troubled teenager. It was also during this time that Richard began to try to escape his father's violent rage by sleeping in a local cemetery. His Catholic father would often tie him to a crucifix in the cemetery overnight as punishment. By the time Richard was 13, he used LSD all the time, and he and Miguel bonded over their shared use of drugs and alcohol. At the time, Richard started having an interest in Satanism and the occult. He started to fantasize about graphic violence, forced bondage, murder, mutilation, and rape. Richard also started to hunt small animals and birds with his father's rifle at night. He would methodically disembowel the animals afterwards. While attending school, Richard got a job at the local Holiday Inn. As part of his job, Richard was given a master key, and he used that to steal from sleeping guests. On at least one occasion, Richard molested 2 children in the hotel's elevator, but it was never reported. This only encouraged him to attempt to sexually assault a woman in her hotel room. He was caught by the victim's husband, and the husband beat Richard before the police arrived. Ultimately, the charges against Richard were dropped when the couple refused to return to Texas to testify against him in court. Then, in 1973, Richard witnessed something that pushed him towards the road of evil. Miguel and his young wife Jessie opened their home to Richard to escape the hands of his father. One day, Miguel and Jessie started to argue in front of Richard. The argument became heated, and in a rage, Miguel took out a gun and shot his wife. She was killed, and Miguel was charged with murder. Miguel pled guilty by reason of insanity and claimed that he suffered PTSD because of his military service. For many experts, this moment was Richard's turning point. This incident did not create a killer overnight, but it normalized violence completely. It showed Richard that murder was power and fear was exciting. Richard would later say watching Jessie getting shot in the face was not traumatic in any way. It actually fascinated him. After the shooting, Richard started to withdraw from society. He was sullen and withdrawn from his family and peers. He began to commit burglaries while getting high. Now Richard, who was in the 9th grade at this point, quit school. Former teachers and classmates of Richard's would later describe him as a troublemaker who didn't regularly attend classes. They alleged that Richard was bullied by the other students, which could be why he left school when he did. Now, with more time on his hands, Richard became obsessed with Satanism, the occult, and serial killers. He moved in with his older sister Ruth and her husband Roberto. Now, Roberto was obsessed with his hobby, being a peeping Tom. He would take Richard along on his late-night escapades. When Miguel got out of the mental hospital in 1977, he sometimes joined Roberto and Richard on their voyeuristic walks at night to watch women through their windows. But soon, Richard needed a change. After drifting through life like a ghost, he decided to head west. In 1982, the 22-year-old Richard decided to permanently settle in the U.S. state of California. Once in California, Richard started using cocaine, which became his drug of choice. He was addicted and started committing burglary to get money for drugs. He was arrested twice for auto theft and then began to neglect personal hygiene. It didn't take long for that theft to turn into violence, and violence turned into murder. But before we get into that, you need to get a clearer picture of Los Angeles in the mid-1980s. The city of Los Angeles had recently hosted the Olympic Games. Crime rates were dropping in some areas, and there was an optimism for the future. But hiding behind this was fear. The police struggled to coordinate across the many jurisdictions in the large city. Serial killers were already embedded in California's memories. With the recent cases of the Zodiac Killer, the Hillside Strangler, and the Manson murders, Californians already knew that evil could hide in plain sight. Then, more people started dying. The first was on April 10, 1984. 9-year-old Mae Young was with her 8-year-old brother looking for a $1 bill that they had lost. Richard approached the two of them and asked Mae to go with him to the basement of the apartment building her family lived in to find it. As soon as they reached the basement, Richard attacked. He beat and strangled the young girl before he sexually assaulted her. He then stabbed her to death with a switchblade before hanging her partially nude body from a pipe. This murder was not linked to Richard until 2009, when his DNA was matched to samples collected from the crime scene. The next was on June 28th. 79-year-old Jenny Vinco was found brutally murdered in her apartment during what appeared to be a burglary of her home. She was stabbed repeatedly in the head, neck, and chest while sleeping in her bed. Her neck was cut so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Richard's fingerprint was found on a mesh screen that he removed to get into the house through an open window. At the time, investigators did not realize that they were now dealing with a future serial killer and investigated these deaths as single events. Even though the attacks continued, the police investigated all of them as separate cases because, unlike most serial killers, Richard did not stick to one killing method. His attacks became more savage as he shot, stabbed, or bludgeoned his victims. He sexually assaulted many, but not all, and often left behind different satanic symbols. He did not have a consistent victim type, no clear geographic pattern, and no signature other than overwhelming brutality. Jenny's death established Richard's pattern of burglarizing the homes of his victims either before or after killing them to pay his rent and support his drug addiction. What followed was one of the most terrifying murder sprees in American history. First, Richard was suspected of a double murder in San Francisco. Sisters Christina and Mary Caldwell were found stabbed to death in their apartment on February 20th, 1985. After his arrest, Richard made a statement that made investigators believe that he committed this crime, even though there was no evidence tying him to these murders. Then on March 17, 1985, Richard shot a random woman in the face outside her home. 22-year-old Maria Hernandez was pulling her car into her garage when a bullet bounced off a set of keys in her hands as she raised them to try to protect herself. She immediately started to play dead, and this saved her life. Her roommate, 32-year-old Dale Okazaki, was not so lucky. When she heard the gunshot, she dropped down to hide behind a kitchen counter in their home as Richard entered the room. When she went to peek over the counter, Richard shot her in the forehead and left. Not yet satisfied, Richard shot and killed 30-year-old Tai Lin Yu the same evening. He pulled the 30-year-old woman out of her car, shot her twice, and fled. She was pronounced dead on arrival when she was brought to the hospital. with 2 murders and 1 attempted murder all in one day. This spurred a media frenzy. The media put out a description of the perpetrator from the survivor's description. He had dark curly hair, bulging eyes, and widely spaced rotting teeth. The press began to call Richard the Valley Intruder or the walk-in killer. On March 27th, which was only a week after these killings, Richard struck again. At about 2 a.m., he snuck into the home of 64-year-old Vincent Zazara and his wife, 44-year-old Maxine. Richard snuck into their bedroom and shot Vincent in the head, killing him. Maxine woke up hearing the gunshot. Richard immediately started to beat her. He then bound her hands and demanded to know where her valuables were. As he ransacked the room, Maxine was able to get her hands free and grabbed a shotgun that was under her bed. What she didn't know was that the gun was not loaded. When Richard turned his attention back to her, Maxine pulled the trigger. Hearing the click of the empty gun, Richard was furious. He shot her 3 times, killing her, but he wanted revenge. He went to the kitchen and got a large knife. He cut an inverted cross into her chest and gouged out her eyes. He put the eyes into Maxine's jewelry box. He then attempted to sexually assault Maxine's body, but was not able to. Richard grabbed the jewelry box and went back home. He kept this as a souvenir, but he unknowingly left something behind. Police discovered Richard's footprints in Vincent and Maxine's flower beds. They were from a pair of Aviva sneakers, and the police made casts of these prints. Authorities also matched the bullet casings at this scene to the previous attacks. This is when the police realized that they were not dealing with just a murderer. They were dealing with a serial killer. Around 2 months later, Richard came back to the area and entered the home of 66-year-old Bill Doy and his disabled wife, Lillian, who was 56. He snuck through the house and surprised Bill in his bedroom. When Bill saw Richard, he tried to get his handgun. When this happened, Richard shot him in the face. He beat Bill until he was unconscious and went into Lillian's bedroom. Richard bound her using thumb cuffs and sexually assaulted her. He then tore the house apart looking for money and valuables. Lillian would survive this attack, but Bill would not. He died of his injuries after reaching the hospital. The sheer cruelty of this crime stunned investigators, and then came the next attack. 2 weeks later, Richard stole a car and drove it to the city of Marovina. When there, he decided to break into the home of 83-year-old Mabel Bell and her disabled sister, 81-year-old Florence Lang. When he snuck into the kitchen, he found a hammer. Richard went to Florence's bedroom and beat her with a hammer before he tied her up. He then bound and beat Mabel before he started using an electrical cord to shock her. Richard then took Mabel's lipstick and drew the satanic pentagram symbol on her thigh, as well as the walls of the bedrooms. The 2 sisters were discovered 2 days later. They were brought to a nearby hospital, both in a coma. Mabel died of her injuries July 15, 1985. Florence died the following month. On the night of June 27, 1985, police suspected that Richard committed another crime: the murder of Patty Higgins. The 32-year-old was sodomized and strangled before her neck was slashed. Richard was charged with her murder and the burglary of Patty's home, but since they had a lack of concrete physical evidence that tied this murder to the others, these charges were dropped. The day after the attacks of Mabel and Florence, Richard drove a stolen car to Burbank, California. He broke into the house of 42-year-old Carol Kyle. Carol and her young son were home that day. Holding them at gunpoint, Richard handcuffed them before he ransacked the house looking for valuables. He then uncuffed Carol's son and told him to bring him to the family's valuables. Afterwards, he put the child in a closet before he sexually assaulted Carol. he threatened her not to look at him, or he would cut out her eyes. When he was finished, he took Carol's son out of the closet and bound him to his mother using handcuffs. During the night of July 2nd, Richard drove another stolen vehicle to the city of Arcadia. He chose his next victim's house at random. That house was owned by 75-year-old Mary Cannon. She lived alone after her husband died, which, to Richard, made her the perfect victim. After breaking into her home, Richard saw Mary asleep in her bedroom. He picked up a lamp and started to bludgeon her until she was unconscious. He then went to the kitchen, picked up a 10-inch or a 25.4 centimeter long butcher knife. Richard then repeatedly stabbed Mary even though she was already dead. By this time, citizens in Southern California were completely consumed by fear. People started locking their doors and windows and installed bars on their windows. Gun stores were sold out of ammunition, and police hotlines were bombarded with telephone calls. Parents refused to let their children sleep alone, and every unexpected noise at night became terrifying. They had every right to be scared, because 3 nights after Mary's death, Richard broke into a home in Sierra Madre. While there, he beat 16-year-old Whitney Bennett with a tire iron when she was sleeping in her bedroom. After searching for, but not finding the perfect knife in the kitchen, Richard tried to strangle the teen to death using a phone cord. While doing this, the cord began to spark, which startled him. When Whitney started to breathe again, Richard ran because he thought that Jesus may have intervened to save her life. When Whitney was taken to a nearby hospital, she was beaten so severely that she was almost not recognizable, but somehow she survived. She had to get 478 stitches to close the lacerations on her face and scalp. But Richard wasn't done yet. 5 days later, Richard broke into the home of 60-year-old Joyce Nelson. After burglarizing the home, Richard went to Joyce, who was sleeping on her couch. He killed her by stomping on her face repeatedly, and he left a shoe print from his Aviva sneaker imprinted on Joyce's face. Afterwards, Richard cruised through a few more neighborhoods before he went back to where he was before. He decided to break into the home of 68-year-old Sophie Dickman. Richard held her by gunpoint as he handcuffed and physically assaulted her. He then attempted to sexually assault her before stealing her jewelry. When he demanded more, Sophie swore that he had taken everything of value. Not believing her, Richard insisted that she swear on Satan that she was telling the truth. She did, and this saved her life. 2 weeks later, Richard stole another vehicle and bought himself a new machete. He drove to the city of Glendale and chose the home of 68-year-old Maxim Needling and his wife, 66-year-old Leela. As the couple were sleeping in their bedroom, Richard snuck in. He started to hack them with the machete and then shot them in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. Before he ransacked the home and robbed the couple's valuables, he mutilated the bodies with his machete. After he sold the stolen goods, Richard drove to the Los Angeles neighborhood of Sun Valley after scoping out the home of the Kavanaugh family. When the household was asleep, Richard broke in. He shot 32-year-old Shaina Ryan with his handgun, killing him. Richard then attacked his wife, Somkit. He sexually assaulted her several times as he beat her. He then slipped into the bedroom of the couple's 8-year-old son. Richard tied the boy up and then dragged Somkit throughout her home, demanding that she reveal where her valuables were. After demanding that Somkit swear to Satan that she was not hiding any valuables from him, he took the items that he had and left. On August 6, 1985, Richard broke into the Northridge home of 30-year-old Chris Peterson and his wife Virginia, age 27. After sneaking into their bedroom, he shot Virginia in the face and Chris in the neck. But Chris didn't die. When Richard tried to run, Chris fought back. Now, in a fight for his life, Chris was able to miss being hit by 2 more shots before Richard escaped. The couple survived this attack. Only 2 days later, Richard stole another car and chose his next victims, 27-year-old Sakina Aboweth and her 35-year-old husband, Elias. Richard entered the house and snuck into the master bedroom. He shot and killed sleeping Elias and then handcuffed Sakina. Richard beat her while demanding to know the location of her jewelry. He then brutally sexually assaulted her and insisted that she swear on Satan that she wouldn't scream. Hearing the commotion, the couple's 3-year-old son came into the bedroom. Richard tied the child up and continued his assault on the child's mother. After leaving the house, Sakina untied her son, sending him to get help from the neighbors. Richard, on the other hand, left Los Angeles to go to San Francisco. 10 days later, Richard broke into the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot 66-year-old Peter in the head, killing him. He then beat and sexually assaulted Barbara before shooting her in the head. He thought that she was dead, but she was still alive and survived this attack. Before leaving the couple's home, Richard used one of Barbara's lipsticks to draw a pentagram and write "Jack the Knife" on the couple's bedroom wall. Once again, Richard left behind a shoe print, which police matched to a specific pair of Aviva sneakers that were not very common during this time. On August 24, 1985, Richard stole another vehicle and drove to Mission Viejo in Orange County. When there, Richard went to the home of 45-year-old James Romero Jr. He and his family had just returned from vacation and had gone to bed. But James's son, 13-year-old James III, was not sleepy. After the household was asleep, he went outside to get a pillow that he'd left in his father's truck. Finding it locked, James III turned back to the house when he heard a rustling sound. He decided to investigate and found nothing. He then went into the garage to do some work on his mini bike and heard what he thought was footsteps going around the house. Peeking outside, James III saw Richard and he went and woke his parents up. Now busted, Richard fled the scene. But young James was able to note the vehicle make, style, and a partial license plate number. His father called the police and gave them this information, thinking that James had chased away someone that was trying to rob them. None of them knew that they were just lucky to have survived. After he escaped, Richard found his next victims, 30-year-old Bill Carnes and his fiancée, 29-year-old Inez Erickson. He entered the couple's home and woke Bill up. Richard shot Bill 3 times in the head and then told the now awake Inez that he was the Night Stalker. As he beat her, Richard demanded that she say that she loved Satan. Richard then tied her up, collected the couple's valuables, and then sexually assaulted Inez. Before he left, Richard told Inez that she was to tell the police that the Night Stalker was here. She was able to untie herself and ran to a neighbor for help. Believe it or not, Bill, he didn't die. Surgeons were able to remove 2 of the 3 bullets from his head, and he survived this attack. All of these crimes caused the citizens of Los Angeles to be very paranoid. Every night felt dangerous, and the media reported every detail of these crimes relentlessly. Since Richard chose his victims at random, no one felt safe. There was also no pattern to his crimes. He didn't have a type, and this created mass fear. But then, police got a break in the case. Investigators found a fingerprint in one of the cars that Richard stole, and were able to identify him from it. This was matched with the fingerprint left at Jenny Vinco's murder scene, so the police released Richard's mugshot to the public. Now everyone in California knew Richard's face, and this decision changed everything. If you remember from the first half of our episode, one of Richard's victims was able to give the police a description of him. Survivor Inez Erickson was also able to give the police a detailed description of her attacker. Do you remember how Richard left his footprints behind from his uncommon sneakers? Police contacted the manufacturer of these shoes and were able to obtain the soles. There was only 6 pairs that existed in men's size 11.5, and only 1 pair that was sold in Los Angeles. Ballistics and fingerprint evidence linked the crime scenes together, and San Francisco's mayor told this information to the press. This made investigators very upset, since they believed that their suspect was following the news coverage of these events. And they were right. Richard heard what the mayor said, so he threw his sneakers over the Golden Gate Bridge. One of the vehicles that Richard stole was found. Even though Richard wiped it down in an attempt to clean away any fingerprints, he missed one. That fingerprint identified Richard, who had a long rap sheet including arrests for drug violations. When they read about Richard's former crimes, the police decided to release his mugshot and told the press, and I quote, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place you can hide." On August 30th, 1985, Richard took a bus to visit his brother in Tucson, Arizona. He had no idea that his face had been plastered across every major newspaper and news program across the state of California. When Richard found out that his brother wasn't home, he took a bus back to Los Angeles. He had no idea that the police identified him to the public. He walked past several police officers, staking out the bus terminal, and then into a convenience store. What happened next is now legendary. In the store, Richard saw a group of elderly Hispanic women and heard them saying that he was the killer in Spanish. That's when he noticed his face on the front page of some of the newspapers in the store. Knowing that he was busted, Richard ran out of the store in a panic. He ran across the Santa Ana highway and attempted to carjack several vehicles. He was stopped by furious residents who knew what Richard did. One of the carjacking victims was Angelina DeTore. When Richard tried to force her car keys out of her hands, her husband Manuel hit him on the head with a fence post. Soon, an angry crowd formed and started chasing Richard through the streets. The residents were armed with pipes, sticks, and anything else that they could use as a weapon. They were able to restrain Richard and beat him brutally as they called the police. When they arrived, Richard ironically begged the police to save him from the mob. The police took him into custody before the mob could kill him. In July of 1998, Richard's trial began. When entering the court, he raised his hand, which he had drawn a pentagram on, and yelled, "Hail Satan!" This was just the start of a trial that shocked the public. Richard soon became one of the most infamous criminals in America. During this time, he bizarrely developed fans. They attended his court proceedings, wrote him love letters, and claimed that Richard was just misunderstood. On August 14, 1988, Richard was convicted of 43 charges, which included 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. On November 7, 1989, he was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber. When his sentence was announced, Richard responded, and I quote, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." Richard had no remorse and no apologies. Richard spent the rest of his life on death row in San Quentin State Prison. He unsuccessfully appealed his conviction and had appeals pending at the time of his death. During his time in prison, Richard married one of his supporters while he received letters and pictures from his fans. On June 7, 2006, Richard died at the age of 53 from B-cell lymphoma, which was worsened by his chronic substance abuse and a hepatitis C infection. No one came to claim his body, so Richard was cremated. Today, the Night Stalker has become permanently embedded in pop culture. Documentaries, TV shows, and books have all been released about Richard's crimes. This brings us to a question. Why are we all so fascinated by serial killers? There are no simple answers to this question. Perhaps it's part fear, part psychology, and part trying to understand the unthinkable. But there's also a danger in turning serial killers into mythological figures. When that happens, victims can disappear from the story when they are the ones who matter the most. The story of Richard Ramirez is not just a horrifying tale. It's a story of fear, trauma, and violence being passed down from one generation to another. It is also a story of a community fighting back and refusing to let someone disappear into the darkness. That may be the strangest part of this story. The reign of one of America's most terrifying serial killers did not end with just prison. It was ended by the public that he terrorized. Thank you for joining me today. What are your thoughts about the Night Stalker? Do you think that this serial killer was born that way, or was he created by his own childhood? Let us know your thoughts on Facebook at Horrifying History, Instagram and Threads at Horrifying_history, X at Horrifying HIST1, or on Blue Sky by searching for Horrifying History. If you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to our podcast. When you do, not only do you let more people know about our show, but you also download our next episode on its release day. It's a great way not to miss our next episode. Mary of Agreda, the Lady in Blue, by locations, visions, and miracles. To learn even more about Horrifying History, visit our website. When you're there, you will find links to all of our social media and to our YouTube channel, which features not just our podcast episodes, but also additional history-based videos for your enjoyment. We also have a blog that's filled with spooky topics and episode updates to read up on. On top of this site is the home to our fan club, which offers excellent perks, like your own feed to listen to our show ad-free, access to new episodes a week early, and a new bonus episode each week. It is also the home to our store that's filled with spooky merchandise that you guys will love. For our fan club members, you will receive a discount in our store as long as you remain a fan club member. You can find all of this and more at horrifying-history-shop.fourthwall.com. Until next time, lock your doors, check your windows, and stay safe.